She's in a coma. So she's laying in a hospital, and some secondary ailment starts developing, pneumonia perhaps. They want to give her antibiotics. What do you do in that case? If this would be actual pain, we all agree that you could follow Ramosha Feinstein, that you don't have to treat, and if the pneumonia is going to put an end to the life of agony and pain, you can withhold. But what about the mental pain? This is mental pain, being in a state of a coma. Is that human dignity? It is not addressed by the poskim. There's different ways to look at it. But remember, we're not dealing here with taking them off equipment. We're not dealing with putting a pillow on their face. We're talking about withholding, what we call shev al taseh. There is reason to allow it, but I'm still waiting for the literature from the great rabbinic authorities. And believe me, I looked around. I have not found anything that actually addresses it. Now, living will, healthcare proxy. And these words are important. In the 60s, there's a lawyer by the name of Louis Kuttner. Louis Kuttner is a fascinating individual, Amnesty International, all kind of different roles he did play. And he writes an article about this concept of a living will. We all realize that courts will respect a will that is written regarding financial matters. Courts should respect as well a will that relates to what should be done with the person when I am no longer capable of making decisions. And he gives us the form, and he tells us that this will be recognized by courts. And this article is written in 1969. By 1979, everyone is familiar with the living will, known as advance directives. Now, in his words, you could see what his agenda was. That, listen, for the time being, we unfortunately society will not accept euthanasia. In other words, unfortunately, society is not yet ready for killing a person when the pain reaches a specific level. However, at least, b'di'evet, let's go ahead, and a person should put in writing what they want to be hooked up to, what not, what things should be withheld, and that is the birth of this concept of a living will. Now, living will is like Torah shebechsav. And just as Torah shebechsav needs a Torah shebal peh, meaning if you go ahead and fill out, you could go online, type in living will, you'll find a list. I do want to be hooked up to dialysis. I don't want to get chemotherapy. I do want to go ahead and be hooked up to a ventilator. I do want to go ahead and get antibiotics for secondary illness. The list is there. Do you think that really covers everything? Obviously not, because there could be hundreds of what-ifs. So what do? You go ahead and get a person that you trust, a person that actually cares about you. And that person should become your health care proxy. So you have the Torah shebechsav, the living will. You have the Torah shebal peh, the health care proxy, and mission accomplished. That's how you could have decisions being made when lo aleinu, the person themselves is no longer able to make such decisions. And these are the words of Louis Kuttner: the rights of dying people to control decisions about their own medical care. Okay? Now, you have to be very careful. If you are indeed assigning someone as your healthcare proxy, before we get into halacha, which we'll discuss, you have to be sure that this is a person that really has you in mind. In other words, if you assign someone as your healthcare proxy who will inherit $4 million when you die, I am a little bit concerned that decisions might be impacted by the bonus. That yes, you will cry by the levaya, you will but human nature, you have to be careful. I personally would not recommend to Queen Elizabeth that she should make Charles her power of attorney. Right? Ervat, you know what that means? He's waiting, the poor guy. And every morning he wakes up and he sees that the mom is alive and ich bin ich kein king. And so personally, I don't think that Charles should be the power of attorney. You have to be sure that it's someone that is really, really concerned. Okay, that's something to be mindful of. Now, there is a benefit of having a rabbi as your healthcare proxy, but even then, be sure what rabbi you choose. In other words, there are different paths there are different rabbinic schools. right? You have the old school, and even today, right? The document sent out here in Toronto by some was one that follows a different school. Personally, I've gone through the different healthcare proxies, and I give a tremendous yishkach to the RCA. It's available online, and I think I'll send the link that will put it in the bulletin, that you get an idea that they do an excellent job following poskim, following the school of Ramosha Feinstein, where a life will not be extended. Heroic measures will not be taken to go ahead and extend the life in agony. At the same time, there will be a sensitivity that you don't withdraw that which sustains life. This balance, delicate balance, should be the philosophy followed by the rabbi you choose to be your healthcare proxy. So that's the information that is relevant. That's the information that is relevant to the issue itself. I start out by saying that this is difficult to discuss. Reality is that we live. Right. It's a gift. Every moment is a gift. We're sitting there at the dinner table and talking about, with our 16-year-old, talking about the lottery. Everyone's talking about the lottery. And how he called his brother in New York to buy him a ticket. And I know very well that if chas v'shalom that ticket wins, my two kids are never going to talk again. Right? I know that. So they're talking about it. And I say, and this is something that's so true, that a person wins the lottery. Fine. What happens if the next day, they have a choice of life or the lottery? Obviously, we would choose life, meaning there's something so valuable in living, and we recognize the significance of life, of every breath, of every human being, and the pain. If you saw someone, if you have seen, and so many of us have seen people in pain, you realize that's nishkan leben. It's not a life. It's a delicate balance. It's a difficult topic. It is one that we have to be mindful of. We have to be mindful of that those around us know what we desire, know what kind of person we want to make those decisions. The healthcare proxy is something that is important. The living will is important. And may we merit that, there's one of the most magnificent rabbinic statements is the fact that before a person leaves this world, there's a benefit in saying the vidui. Vidui, it's a confession. I don't like the word confession, but it's more of a declaration that you recognize that I haven't been perfect, but I'm still committed to the Ribono Shel Olam. It's a very powerful prayer. So the halacha tells us that when you are interacting with someone that's dying, you say the vidui with them. However, you tell them, by the way, when you're saying the vidui, harbe hitvadu v'chayu. Many people who said vidui are alive. And it is in some ways segula, to live. In other words, the rabbis are very aware of the fact that, yes, you have to be mindful of your soul and your spiritual responsibility, and vidui is important. But don't go ahead and depress a person who is dying and say, guess what, you're dying. Start saying your confessions. Rather, turn around and make it into something positive. By saying vidui, you're going to go ahead and live. Okay, this is a rabbinic statement that is sensitive to our state. And it's difficult. And we have to be mindful of it. That we're not here on planet Earth forever. We try to achieve things while we are alive for the sake of community, Klal Yisrael, Torah. The list is long of good things we could do. But we have to be aware, and we have to hope that Be'ezrat Hashem, may we merit that the Ribono Shel Olam watches over us in good health, and that every decision is made in an appropriate way, that we are sure that the tradition that was so beloved and precious to us during life be with us until the last breath on this earth. Yes?
If one is signed up with the Halachic organ donor program, would that be taken into account in making Pesach at the end?
Okay. The organ donation is actually what I'm planning Bezrat Hashem to address next week, and the complexities that exist there. It will be, they have something known as the 5 wishes, which is popular in the United States. And the wishes include the living will, healthcare proxy, and some other things, and they include organ donation. So these things are part of the documents that do exist. But I would like to separate it because, at least in North America, it's important that we are aware. So I'll get to it next week, Mizrat Hashem.
Because on the card, there are only two options that you have. I am signed up, and there are only two options that you actually have on the card.
Through HUD? Through the... Which?
What are the options?
Okay. It's a topic we're going to address, but I do want to see it after the class. Yes?
Does the living will, it has to be an official it's an official document? Or it's just a piece of paper?
It's basically a piece of paper, but you have to be sure that it's written out in a clear way, that it's signed by witnesses, and it's something that is available. And again, the RCA has one, of course, the Agudas Yisrael has one, or there's a regular living will. I recommend, again, the RCA one because it's spelled out. It shows you where you have to sign it, where you have to date it. It has to be notarized, perhaps, 2 witnesses. So it's a simple document. Doctor?
Just a couple of questions, or a question about if somebody does make a living will, but it's not a halachic living will, and their substitute decision maker, which is what they're actually called in Ontario, feels that it's not appropriate, and then goes and consults the rabbi when the patient themselves can no longer speak for themselves, what would take precedence?
So that is something that I think you know a lawyer. And
He doesn't know anything about these.
it is a very good question. It is something that it is unclear. In other words, you have as if a contradiction between the Torah Shebachtav and the Torah Sheba'al Peh. It is very possible that if you could go ahead, and again, speak to the lawyers, if you could go ahead and argue that the person, and I have read of cases where they argued that when the document was recorded, the person was under a specific state, and he changed since then. There was a change. He had awakening. There was an experience he went through. You could go ahead and overrule the written document, but it would have to go through a court. You would have to have a judge who would go ahead and order that you follow the proxy or the substitute, as you mentioned it.
Right.
Yes.
So, what responsibilities should you be aware of for keeping on a living will, agree to be part of a living will on someone's behalf?
The responsibilities.
So because living will say is done by a lawyer, and that case that person's no longer able to make the decisions, so they say you make the decision for me. But after listening to what you're saying today, there's a heck of a lot more just to that living will from a halacha point of view.
From the halachic point of view, there is more than a living will. I think you could cover your bases, with the halachic one. The RCA one, we will place it, we will make it available, and choosing a healthcare proxy, all bases will be covered. It is not a very complex document. It's not a very complex document. It is complex if you take a general living will, and then you go ahead and want to make it halachic, make the adjustment into the halachic realm. That would be complex. But if you take one that is already halachic, like what the RCA offers, you could simplify it indeed. Dr. Dunek, and then Chaim.
You mentioned before that if someone is in pain, you can withhold certain treatment if you're not sure when they pass away without further extending his pain, but you're not allowed to do something for him to take away his pain. Where does it fit into getting, let's say, heavy medications that is going to take away the pain as a side effect will shorten his life?
So the poskim deal with an issue of a medication that will indeed take away the pain, but there is a possibility that it will be that which will shorten his life. The poskim deal specifically with morphine, and morphine is permissible. It is prohibited to give a dosage that doctors would tell you the precise dosage. The dosage that will just simply end his life is prohibited. A dosage that keeps him comfortable, even though there is a chance that it shortens a life, if the intention is to end pain, it is permissible. This is something the poskim dealt with, and it is something that they make very clear that it is permissible. Doctor, then
Just a comment about substitute decision makers, and there's something called attorney for power of personal care. So you can sign something like that, or there is in Ontario a hierarchy of, if you haven't signed an attorney for personal care, then your spouse, then your child, or if you're a child, then your parent. So there's a whole hierarchy. But as far as if you don't also have a living will, there's a, you should make sure that your power of attorney knows what your wishes are verbally, and that, but not just that they know, but that your family should know. There's also sort of, in Ontario right now, they're trying to get doctors to bring the issue up with their patients and get them to, even if they don't write a living will, to at least make sure that their family members or whoever their power for personal care is, that they know what the person's wishes are. So if they're not capable of speaking for themselves, there's somebody who can speak for them.
Good. Thank you. That is very good. This is. One last, yes.
You mentioned the vidui. Does the patient has to be, conscious, or
Ideally, yes.
if not?
Ideally, yes.
If not, you don't do it?
People around, there's a video that could be said, but there are things to be said. But the ideal vidui, if a person is going through a procedure, there's nothing wrong with saying vidui before a serious procedure. And again, as the rabbi said, it is a merit that in saying the vidui, that indeed yishkav refuah shalem to all cholei Yisrael, and may we merit to only have discussions and debates on issues of Chaim Arukim of Brius. Thank you so much to the sponsors. Thank you so much for coming out. And thank you to our cameraman. Have a good Tanach. Next week.